Um, we've seen a lot at the Department of Education. We've seen a lot in terms of later on in the show, I'm going to be talking about what's happening with the judges and how they are sort of entering the chat. But right now, it's a real challenging moment, particularly for those of us who know that our kids are going to have services impacted by this sort of hostile takeover at the Department of Education, not just our kids, but our educators and the people who help to ensure that our school communities are safe. Talk to us about what you all are seeing at Moms Rising when it comes to these attacks on the Department of Education.
Well, one of the things we're seeing is that our members are definitely outraged. Everything from the appointment of folks to lead all the agencies, but even the
Mm,
Department of Education, didn't you tell us that this was going to be a meritocracy? So where are the people with experience in education, in childhood
mm,
development?
mm.
Look, in running federal agencies and institutions in these nominations. And so we know McMahon and all of the appointees really highlight the lion that was going on when we talk about DEI, right? That it's not
Right.
about putting forth, or shifting the focus of leadership in the country to people who get those positions on merit. And so it's one
Yeah.
is a really scary situation for an unqualified non-educator to be running the department. And then the second
Mm,
piece on the federal level are, of course, the budget cuts that are being proposed. And then on
right.
the state level, these vouchers that are, people get very
Oh.
confused about what it means for public funds that are for public education going to subsidize private school and private education, right?
Mm.
So you got these
I
three,
thought
you
we
got
we'd
this multi.
seen I
Go
thought we
ahead.
had seen so many reports on how vouchers are literally bankrupting state education systems. They end up giving a disreport, like to the tune of 70 to 80% of the voucher recipients are going to wealthy families who are already sending their kids to private schools. And getting a voucher doesn't mean that you have enough money to get your kid to private school because you got to make up the difference between the voucher and the admission fee. Is that still happening? Are we still seeing that percolating as a solution to education distress in this moment? Uh-oh, she froze. Oh, and that was an impassioned question.
All over the
Oh, wait,
country.
there
Yep,
you
there are
are. Okay.
places that have the. I heard your question. I was answering it. Sorry if I.
Okay. Actually, Monifa, there's a
But
there's a
yeah,
computer
no, I
love
said we
thing
are still
happening.
seeing it
Oh, she can't see
percolate.
me.
There's
Hold on,
states
hold
where
on.
we have
Time out. I'm giving
defeated.
her the timeout sign. Time out 1 second. There's a computer love thing happening. Is it possible for you to answer without the headphones? Because I think we might get better audio because there's some distortion happening right now. And I want to make sure we get
How's
this
this
question
sounding?
answered. Oh, phenomenal.
Oh,
Lovely.
okay.
Go right
Yes,
ahead.
I can go without the headphones. What I was going to say is that we have not seen a total defeat of this voucher issue. Some
Mm,
states have defeated it. We kind of stood loud and firm in a place like New York, but it's something that keeps coming up. We're seeing resurgence of it. And you are right. It is for wealthy families to subsidize the private schools that their students are attending because, quite frankly, no voucher is going to help people who are working class folks pay. I know in New York, the private school tuitions are $50,000, $60,000 a year. So
And
we
Monifa,
have to
that was
really,
when you and I had little kids. They are higher now.
it's
Because I
higher
remember
now.
going on them interviews. I was like, y'all out your damn mind.
It is
What's happening in this
higher.
building that's worth that? Wow.
So
Okay.
there's a three-level attack, and people are really outraged and rising up. But we're going to have to make Congress act. Like we're really going to have to put some batteries in these folks' backs, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to have to build power so that when these midterms come, we have enough people who have the battery in their back. You can't, it's not just you got to
Mm.
have the majority of people, right? You got to have
Right.
the Jasmine Crockett's, you got to have the Summer Lees, you got to have
Right.
the people who are going to stand on business. So
Mm.
it's two things that you're trying to fight for if we're going to save the Department of Education. But inside those cuts, hurting people who have, I don't know how many listeners have kids who have IEPs, or some place it calls a 504 plan. It's called different things in different places. But our children have special needs. People learn differently. And when you take away funding for that, it's going to ultimately harm the kids.
Mm. And that's the challenge that I think a lot of people are facing, that when they went to the voting booth and they were excited about getting rid of DEI and CRT, they didn't realize that they were DEI recipients. They were the recipients of diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility. They're special needs children who, because having special needs children is not something that's limited to one community. All of us have children who have special needs. And frankly, well, I was going to go into another conversation, but let's stick with the point here at hand. The reality is accessibility, diversity, equity, and inclusion. These are the principles that forced schools to start paying attention to students who they could traditionally ignore. Like, people forget, when your child, if you discovered your child had special needs at a certain point, you did not keep the child with you. You sent them to a home. You sent them away. They weren't a part of your family, of your community. They were the ones that everyone forgot or pretended no longer existed. I was talking last night with Eljoy, and we were talking about how before Social Security came about after the Great Depression in the 1930s, when you got old and couldn't work no more, you died. Or you went to the
You
Poe
That's
house.
right.
You worked up until death. You
Up
went to you
until
went
you died.
Yes. And so we forget that all of us have now shifted our understanding of government since the Great Depression. And there are demands that we make on the government, and providing for our needs to be met vis-a-vis the federal Department of Education and its connection with the state counterparts has been a real fundamental part of that backbone. And I want to come back to something that you said just a minute ago about putting batteries in the back of the folks in Congress. Because we had a town hall yesterday, Monifa, a virtual town hall with members of the CBC and the Democratic caucus. And there were some folks in the chat, some of the audience members, who were very palpably frustrated that there was not a legislative knock them out, a legislative, right hook that was going to come and knock out, all of this injustice. And I'm realizing y'all don't realize they don't have votes. They can't even demand hearings on, they could demand it, but they're not going to be able to get hearings
Right.
on certain things. So
Mhm.
to do this work within the confines of this system and not know how the system works, can you talk to us about what it means to put a battery in the back of our congressional representatives who don't have the ability to run nothing but they mouths at some point because they don't have the numbers, they don't have the votes? What does that look like for us?
I think it looks like us really demanding that people stand in their power. So there's the power that you have when you're in the majority, and there's the power that you have when you're in the minority. And so some of what we've seen before is that some people just refuse, right? They just become ungovernable. Think back to when Obama was trying to appoint the final Supreme Court appointee, right? There's a
Yep.
way that you move that's like, this is what you're supposed to do. These are the rules. This is what's socially acceptable to stand
Right.
on. And then there's thinking outside of the box. I think a great
Mhm.
example this week of thinking outside of the box is the governor of Maine, right? The governor of Maine,
Yeah.
she said, okay, come for me. And guess what? When the checks come to us and the federal taxes and the state taxes are
Federal.
together, and then we separate that out and then we send those federal taxes to you, I'm not
Mm.
going to send it.
How about that? Fund yourself,
Yes,
Louisiana.
I have
Fund
less
yourself,
power.
Mississippi.
I'm not in power here. The rule says that we're supposed to send it to you, but I'm just not going to do it, right? And
Mm.
so there's an equivalent to that type of energy that I think there's a frustration with going along, and I think particularly for our communities, because one of the ways that we have changed the laws is by not following the law, right?
Ooh.
Slavery was legal. Segregation was legal. Jim Crow was legal. Sitting on the back of the bus, that's the law. That was supposed to happen, right? And
Right.
there's ways that you move that say, I know this is the rule, but I'm breaking this rule, right? I'm
Yeah.
breaking this rule to
Yeah.
expose it. I'm breaking this rule to be ungovernable. And there is a desire from the people that our elected leaders do not comply with what's moving on. And we know there's limitations, of course.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
can't call a hearing. What can you call? You know,
You could maybe do
can
a
you
field hearing in the district of the Republicans. You might not be able to do a hearing at the Hill, but you could do a
Mhm.
field hearing, which I think you and I have talked about before. You could be in their districts, bringing their voters together to say, let's talk about what's really going on. Is something like that? Would that be in line with
So
this idea that stand in your
yeah,
power?
we think like organizers. We think like building power, right? We like, okay, we've got
Right.
this much power. How do we build? And sometimes it's about participating, and sometimes it's about withholding a participation of something, right?
Mm.
And so just really thinking outside of the box. But we have to focus on those midterms. I'm not like in la la
Yeah.
land. I know that they are
Right.
really limited. And I think everyone out there needs to know that the CBC is right with the rules that are in place and with the
Yeah.
power that's in place. They just being like, we saw what happened yesterday with the budget. We saw what happened with that horrible, horrible budget. We planned to talk about education today, but if we don't talk about healthcare, who's
Come on.
who's
Let's do
going to
it.
suffer the most
Let's do
in
it.
this
Yes.
country?
Yes.
Women, y'all. And that's why I get so frustrated with women, with non-black women who have voted for this piece. How half of all children in the United States are born on Medicaid?
What?
Half, 50%.
Jiminy Christmas. Wow. I did not know that.
How could
Oh
any
my
how could
God.
any woman vote for someone who says I'm going to cut Medicaid?
Oh my God.
And
I
I have
knew
to
it was
pause on
significant. I didn't
that.
know. Right. That's heavy. That
It's
is
it's
heavy.
it's and we were fighting to expand Medicaid state by state. I think we were on here a few months ago talking about last year talking about the win in North Carolina. But now none of that matters if you take $800 billion from its budget.
Wow. And so this vote yesterday, I think I saw that there was one Thomas Massey out of Kentucky. He's in the fourth district. He's a Republican who voted no. All the Democrats voted no, and he is a Republican who voted no. I'm not seeing any other. I'm scrolling down this list of the New York Times has a list of who voted how. Talk to us a bit about this budget. We've been talking about it in advance of the vote, but now that they took this vote last night, it'll now go to committee. It'll get marked up, and then they'll send it to the Senate for further deliberation. Talk to us about some of the things that disturbed you the most about what was in this proposed budget. And remember, folks, the budget we're in right now goes until March 13th. After March 13th, they need a budget to run the rest of the government, and that's why this pressure is on. Give us a sense as to what concerned you the most, Monifa.
Well, it has gone through various transformations, and I've been in meetings all day yesterday and today. So you're probably looking at more updated information than I have. But I will tell you that it really, I think it worries me to the core, the piece around healthcare. And I think that,
Yeah.
you could have the total oppression Olympics up inside that budget. I mean, so much stuff that's happening is going to be so scary for seniors, for children. I mean,
Right.
SNAP and Head Start. I mean,
Right.
I think we could take a whole program just explaining how vitally important these things are to our communities. WIC, I want to shout out Shirley Chisholm because I was at Brooklyn
Mm.
Museum where there's a quilt by the amazing artist Bisa Butler that is
Wow.
that pays homage to Shirley Chisholm, but she's the architect of WIC,
Mm.
of the SEEK program. Like all of these programs that rely on federal monies that have really shifted people out of poverty into working class, into the middle class. Really sustains communities and sustains our families and our family economic security and the economy of the overall state that you're in. And
Right.
so
Right.
those things are really scary. But this dagger in healthcare is just vicious. I
Yeah.
just don't even understand how anyone want to cut healthcare. And you know me. I'm like they evil. They want to give us the slave. But to
Ain't
just
nothing good in them.
to cut healthcare, I mean, where are you? Where's your moral compass?
Mm.